the Cyclops. After 10 years in a hot, overcrowded army camp, no one was sorry to leave. The different sectors of the Greek army said their goodbyes, wished one another a swift and successful voyages, and cast off from the Trojan shores for the last time. In our small fleet of 12 ships, I and my Ithacan followers set our course for home. We were excellent. Instead of the stifling heat of the dusty plains, we had a fresh sea breeze on our cheeks, and the salt spray tasted of long-forgotten pleasures, making us ache with joy. Our crimson ships were filled with the riches of Troy, and we were glad that we would have so much to show for our long absence. Behind us, Troy lay smoking in ruins. Perhaps it was superstition, but not one of us looked back. No, we all looked forward toward Ithaca, toward our home. The wind, however, was south-southeast, and we were driven north to the land of Cessonius. No doubt, still flushed by our success at Troy, we disembarked and swept through the town of Ismarus, seizing whatever we desired and killing whoever stood in our way. It was sheer piracy of looting, but my men wanted to carry home as much wealth as possible. Besides, after 4 days at sea, it was sensible to replenish our diminishing collection of food and wine. As soon as we pillaged the town, I ordered our getaway. Unfortunately, my men had already grown complacent, fat with their success. They laughed at me and told me to relax and enjoy myself because that is what they were going to do. So we spent that evening on the shores of Ismarus in drunken celebration, roasting whole oxen and sheep and drinking vast quantities of strong red wine. Just as I feared, the Cessonians had gone inland in search of reinforcements to drive away their unwelcome visitors. They attacked our camp at dawn. You can imagine our condition. Our famous army was overwhelmed and driven back into the beach where the ships were moored. We were lucky to get away without losing more than around 6 men out of 60 from each ship. We were glad to escape so lightly, but we were saddened by the loss of our comrades. It seemed an unnecessary waste, and indeed it was. Besides, it now dawned on us that we were still a long way from home. If the gods were against us, we might never get there. The exuberant mood in which we had sailed away from the coast of Troy had gone for good. As though to confirm our new sense of foreboding, a violent storm blew up. We managed to lower our sails and row into the shore before any damage was done. 2 anxious days followed in which we watched the tempest churn up the sea. On the 3rd day, we were able to cast off once more, and we now made rapid progress south. Within a week we reached Malea, the southeast cape of Peloponnese, and our confidence began to return. But as we rounded the cape, ready for the last leg of our journey, north toward Ithaca, a gale-force wind blew up from the east and drove us off course, past Cythrea and many miles to the west. For 9 days the wind blew us west, farther and farther from home. We could only sit by helplessly and watch. On the 10th day, we were blown onto the shores of Libya. We disembarked, and some of us went in search of water, while others prepared a meal. After we had eaten and begun recovering, I sent a small party off to spy out the land and see what they could find out about its inhabitants. Meanwhile, the rest of us set on the task of cleaning up our ships and repairing the damaged sails. It was not long before we were ready to sail again, but my party of explorers had not returned. We waited, and still there were no sign of them. In the end, I had no choice but to send out a second party and search for the first, and when this second group failed to return, I decided to go and look for them myself. I took 6 of my most reliable men, and together we climbed the cliffs above the beach and made our way inland. It did not take long to find them. They had met with some natives on the land who had made them feel welcome and given them lotus fruit to eat. The lotus fruit, so men told me after, tastes of nectar and honeydew and is so strong a drug that whoever eats it is instantly addicted. Once my men had tasted it, they lost all desire to return home and wished only to remain forever in the land of lotus eaters, feasting on this strange and dangerous fruit. Although the drug made them too drowsy to put up much resistance, it took a great effort to drag them all back to the ships. Ignoring their tears and pleas to be left behind, we bound them with ropes and shoved them in hold of my ship until we had sailed away far from the Libyan coast. Now we were despondent. As far as we knew, we were farther than ever from home, but even worse, we were no longer sure how to get there. The night had come to a small wooded island, laying close to a much larger one. Here we found a sandy inlet where we docked our ships on the beach and made our camps. As soon as we began to explore our new surroundings, we thought that our luck had turned. The island's only inhabitants were abundant flocks of goats, and it was not long before we had caught 100 or so, and we set about preparing a feast. Later, as we lay under the stars on the soft sand, savoring the delicious wine, of which we still had plenty, we noticed the glow of fires on the large island nearby. We also heard the bleating of sheep and goats, and from time to time, unmistakably, human shouts. It struck us as odd that people would live so close and yet not use the small island on which we had camped. The flocks of wild goats were matched with good soil, luxuriant vegetation, and sweet-tasting natural springs. The thought that the island held some hideous secret made us uneasy as we prepared to sleep, but we resolved to sail across the larger island the next day. This was not a matter of idle curiosity. We wanted to find out where we were and to get directions for our journey. The following day was heralded by one of those lovely Mediterranean dawns that gladdens the heart. Leaving the main body of the fleet where it was, I sailed across to the mainland with my crew. We moored our ship in a small natural harbor, and together with 12 of my crew, I clambered ashore. We had not gone far when we came to the entrance of a great cave covered in laurels. Walls of stone and timber formed in the courtyard in front of it. Getting no response to our cries of greeting, we decided to investigate the cave for ourselves. It was dim inside, but pleasantly cool and airy, and as soon as our eyes had adjusted to the light, we saw pens full of lambs and kids. Alongside these stood buckets of whey and baskets of cheese stacked high right up to the ceiling. Whoever lives here must be a giant, I joked as I looked around. Anyone else would need a ladder to get up to the top of those stacks, and there's no ladder here. My men were all taking as much cheese, lambs, and kids as we could, making our escape before the owner returned. I was outraged. We're not mean, sneaking burglars, but men of honor, I exclaimed. Besides, unless we wait for the owner, how do we find out where we are? This shamed them into silence. We lit fire and helped ourselves to some of the excellent cheese while we waited. We did not have to wait long. As soon as I saw the owner, I realized that I had been a terrible mistake to stay. He was not merely a giant. He was a colossus with an ugly, savage face and a single, huge eye planted right in the middle of his forehead. He penned up his rams and billy goats in the courtyard and drove the ewes milking goats inside. When he sealed up the entrance in the cave, it was an enormous boulder that 20 strong men could not have budged. He began milking his flocks and curdling some of the milk to make cheese. Once he had finished, he rekindled the fire, ready to eat his supper and settle down for the night. All the time we were crowded in the shadows, hoping by some miracle to escape his notice. But as soon as the firelight spread around the cave, he saw us, his uninvited guests. "Who the hell are you?" he growled. "And what are you doing here?" We were terrified, and I had to make a huge effort to sound calm as I replied. "We are Greeks lost at sea on our return from Troy. We came to you in hope that you'll help us find our way in the name of mighty Zeus, patron of all guests and suppliants. We ask you to show us your hospitality." The giant bared his foul teeth and laughed in my face. "You cannot forget your mighty Zeus, little Greek. I am a Cyclops, and we Cyclops couldn't care less about the gods. As for my hospitality, you'll have a chance to sample that in a moment. But first tell me more. Where have you moored your ships, and how many other little Greeks did you leave behind to guard it?" "Our ships were broken on the rocks," I replied quickly. "We are the only survivors." The Cyclops grunted and spit in the dust at my feet. Then, without warning, he seized 2 of the companions and smashed their heads against the rocks and the walls of the caves until the blood ran down and soaked it into the floor. Before our sickened eyes, he devoured them whole and smacked his bulbous lips, washed down his last mouthful with 2 buckets of milk. We huddled into the corner, too shocked and disgusted to speak as the Cyclops lay down among his animals and slept. I drew my sword with a trembling hand, ready to kill him, and then and there. But to do so would have been suicide, for we could never have shifted the enormous boulder that sealed the door. We passed a wretched night, pressed together for comfort, unable to sleep. The next morning the Cyclops rekindled the fire, milked his flocks, and ate 2 more of my companions for breakfast. Then, having shut us in, he drove his flocks off to the mountainside, left in despair. We had to do something quickly, or another 2 days with this gruesome creature would have consumed us all. But what on earth could we do? I thought and thought until at last I came up with a plan.